In this video, we're going to look at how you can show weighted averages in Adaptable. Weighted averages is a very popular form of finding a kind of what you might call a true average. It's used particularly in finance, but it's really used anywhere where instead of wanting to do just a pure mean, where you give essentially every value in your result set equal importance, with a weighted average, as the name implies, you will give a weighting to different values. So some values are more important than others, with the result that the overall average takes into consideration the weighting as well as just the pure number. It's probably easier to show you than to explain. And there's actually a couple of different ways you can do it in Adaptable. One is what we might call positional weighting average, where we show the weight based on how you order the grid. And that uses layouts and AG grid agfuncs. And the second is what you might call a pure weighted average, where you provide the figure using AdaptableQL, so we always give you the same result irrespective of how the grid is sorted and grouped. So let's look at the first one first, which is doing it through a layout. And here we've got a very simple result set. We've got a list of subjects. We've got two classes, years 7 and 8. We've got some pupils. And in each subject, each pupil has an exam result. And therefore, if we wanted just to work out their average exam, that would be easy to do. Probably the first thing we should do is really maybe group the row. So let's first group it by class, and then let's group it by pupil. So now if we open it up, say for instance, here's Andy. Let's do Andy first. We can see that Andy's got 10, 30, 50, 70, 100. So altogether he's done 5 subjects, 100. So his average would be 20. And therefore, if we were to do a classic agfunc of 20, so in AG grid, it's called a value aggregation, you choose average. There we are. You can see he's got an average of 20 across his subjects. But what happens if instead of just looking at the pure result, you also want to take into account attendance? Depending how well does in attendance should also affect his overall result. In other words, that should be the weighting. So that's easy to do in Adaptable. And essentially, we provide a specialist agfunc called weighted average. So let's go into the layout and let's do that. Now, everything I'm showing you now is done at runtime through the Adaptable UI. But of course, you could do all of this yourselves as developers at design time. You can provide all this through adaptable options and predefined config, or in fact, you can do it programmatically at runtime as well. So instead of using the average for the exam result, let's now use the weighted average. And then a second drop-down appears, which is the weight. And in our case, we want to weight it on attendance. And in fact, we're also going to click this just to kind of get rid of the name of the agfunc in the header bar. So now when we finish, we can see that instead of 20, it's now 21.33. And that's calculated by essentially multiplying that by that, plus that by that, plus that by that, plus that by that, plus that by that, then divided by this number here. So this, therefore, is the weighted average. And because we're using an agfunc, you get the weighted average for the whole year, or in fact, you can get the weighted average for the entire result set. And there's one other nice thing actually you can do if you're using this form, and that is you can also just highlight some cells just to see the weighted average for those cells. So for instance, if I was to highlight just these 5 cells, I can go into weighted average, and obviously I get the same number, 21.33, because that's that number here. But if I just want to have a look at the weighted average just of those two, then it's 20, obviously. And if I want to look at the weighted average of those, then it's 33, which is that. So that's the first way of doing weighted average, where you provide it as an agfunc, and then the result displays according to how the grid is sorted and grouped. But sometimes you might want to provide a weighted average, which is based on your data set, and you always want a result, and you don't need, or don't want rather, to take into account how you've ordered the grid. And the way to do that is through AdaptableQL, which is our very powerful query language, which we use for alerts and for calculated columns and for expressions and for queries and for all sorts of things. So in this case, it's probably easiest to create a calculated column. So let's create a new calculated column. We'll call it calc because I'm not being very inventive today. And instead of just doing a pure scalar query where we return a value based on the row, we're going to do an aggregated scalar, which, as the name implies, returns a single value based on multiple rows. And there's a number of different aggregated scalars you can do. We'll try and do a video over the next few months for each of them. There's huge amounts possible here. But as I say, we're going to do an average. So we're going to do average, and then average can take in various things. It can take in a column. So we're going to say we want the average of exam result. But of course, we want to provide a weighting. So you can pass in a second argument to average. And in this case, it's going to be the weight. And weight receives the name of a column. And in our case, as we know, the weight is the attendance. And then if we want to make other things available, we can. It knows it's a number. So now when I finish, there's my weighted average. And if I make this column visible, you can see I've got this number. In fact, let's edit. We created a format column before. So in this format column, let's add calc as well. Oops, not that one. Where are we? This one. And you can see that the number we get here is always 22.07 because that obviously is the same result here, 22.07, as we have for the whole grid. In fact, if we wanted to, we could have this number here and this number here by editing our calculated column. So if we go back into our calculated column and we go back into the expression, we can add a group by. And then in group by, we can say we want to group it first by class. That's what we've got in the grid currently. And then by pupil. And now you can see I have 21.33 here because obviously these all match to here. And the nice thing about this value here is, as I say, it's not positional. So if I get rid of that and I get rid of that, I still have my calc showing me for the pupil based on the group by that we gave it. So there we are. That's calculated columns. Two ways to do it in Adaptable. One is to use AGGrid's Ag function. It's one of the many excellent features that AGGrid offers. And the second way to do it is using AdaptableQL. I think actually weighted average is a really good example of how Adaptable takes what is in AGGrid and for very advanced users leverages those features to offer cutting edge features which would be very useful for people who really need to get the most out of their data. As always, thanks for watching. If you'd like a personalized demo, please get in touch and we'll be happy to show you more. Or indeed, if you'd like a trial license to try out Adaptable by yourselves using your own data, please get in touch and we'll be happy to give you a free, no obligation trial license. Thank you for watching.